Have you ever faced a decision so important that you are afraid of making the wrong choice? We often ask God to change our circumstances, but what if He wants to change our wisdom first? In 1 Kings chapter 3, we're going to unpack one of the most famous requests in the entire Bible, Solomon's request for wisdom. And we're going to see God's generous response. And I'll give you one practical action to help you seek God's wisdom before making your next important decision. In this episode of Biblical Unlocks, this show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps you in a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. Okay, so 1 Kings chapter 3 marks the beginning of Solomon's reign, and although Israel is at peace, Solomon recognizes that leading God's people is beyond his own ability. And at Gibeon, God invites Solomon to ask for whatever he desires, but rather than requesting a long life, riches, or victory over his enemies, Solomon asks for an understanding heart to govern God's people wisely. God delights in this request, and he grants him unparalleled wisdom along with riches and honor. And the chapter concludes with Solomon's famous judgment between two women claiming the same baby, and it demonstrates that God's gift of wisdom is already at work. So let's read verses 1 to 15. The focus here is going to be Solomon asking God for wisdom. And my question to you is, why does God delight more in wisdom than in wealth or success? Verse 1. Solomon made a marriage alliance between Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had finished building his own house, and the house of the Lord, and the wall around Jerusalem. The people were sacrificing at the high places. However, because no house had yet been built for the name of the Lord, Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and offered incense at the high places. The king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the principal high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I should give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. Although I am only a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil, for who can govern this great people of yours?" It pleased the Lord that Solomon asked this. God said to him, "Because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor all your life. No other king shall compare to you. If you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your life." Then Solomon awoke. It had been a dream. He came to Jerusalem, where he stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. He offered burnt offerings and offerings of well-being, and provided a feast for all his servants. Alright, verses 1 to 15. So why does Solomon ask for wisdom instead of riches or power or anything like that? The reason is because Solomon understands something really important. What is his greatest need? Right? Is it a larger kingdom, or is it a wiser heart? He understands something, that governing God's people requires discernment beyond human intelligence. And I want to ask you this question, right? Imagine you were Solomon. What would you ask for, right? He doesn't ask for God to make his life easier. Solomon asks for God to make him more faithful. And this is something really important. Even though he is king and has everything that he wants and everything that he could possibly dream of, he asks something. He asks for wisdom. And this admission requires us to know that we do not have wisdom on our own, right? We would think, I don't know, we have all the wisdom that we have right now, and we're smart, intelligent, wise people, and what else is there to have? But humility is the beginning of wisdom, because only the humble recognize their need for God's grace, right? God gladly fills the heart that admits first that it is empty. And the second thing is, God gives Solomon riches and honor as well, on top of that. Why? Because God recognizes that Solomon sought God's priorities before his own, and God is pleased when we desire what pleases him. The earthly blessings that Solomon gets were never guaranteed, but Scripture repeatedly shows that seeking God's kingdom first places every other blessing in its proper place. So, we can observe something, that people who pursue heavenly things first are better equipped to receive the earthly blessings without becoming enslaved by them. God knows, that if he was to give us the earthly blessings first, we might become enslaved by them, and they might become our idols instead of, us focusing on God. Okay, let's read verses 16 to 28 now. Solomon is going to judge between two mothers, very famous story in the Bible. And my question to you is, what does true wisdom see that human cleverness misses? So, verse 16. 2 women who were prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, "Please, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then on the 3rd day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth. We were together. There was no one else with us in the house. Only the 2 of us were in the house. Then this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. She got up in the middle of the night and took my son from beside me while your servant slept. She laid him at her breast and laid her dead son at my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my son, I saw that he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, clearly it was not the son I had borne. But the other woman said, 'No, the living son is mine, and the dead son is yours.' The first said, 'No, the dead son is yours, and the living son is mine.' So they argued before the king. Then the king said, 'The one says, "This is my son who is alive, and your son is dead," while the other says, "Not so, your son is dead, and my son is the living one." So the king said, "Bring me a sword." And they brought a sword before the king. The king said, "Divide the living boy in 2, then give half to the one and half to the other." But the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because compassion for her son burned within her, "Please, my lord, give her the living boy. Certainly do not kill him." The other said, "It shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide it." Then the king responded, "Give her the living boy. Do not kill him. She is his mother." All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice. Very interesting. So, what did we see there? Solomon suggests dividing the baby in 2. Why? Because the 2 women are arguing over whose son it actually is, right? Obviously, during the night, one of them has laid on their baby, and the baby is dead, and one of them has swapped the baby, the living baby, for the dead one, and now there's a fight. Well, hang on, you've stolen my baby, and I know exactly how my baby looks like, and, they're arguing with each other. So Solomon says, Solomon's not actually trying to harm the child, but he's revealing the hearts of the other 2 women. The heart posture. True wisdom exposes what cannot be seen on the surface, and the real mother would rather lose her claim, right, than lose her son. And the person who's making the false accusation, the false claim, is content with the death of the child if she cannot have her own way because her son is already dead. So, Wisdom is capable of discerning motives beyond the superficial appearance. And that is what spiritual wisdom is. You need to look beyond outward actions, beyond superficial appearances, to the condition of the heart, because God is never fooled by appearances, because he judges what lies within. That's what we read in 1 Samuel chapter 17, I think. God looks beyond the superficial appearance towards the heart. And the second thing is, all Israel is amazed with Solomon's judgment, because they recognize that this wisdom comes from God. Human intelligence impresses people for a moment, but God's wisdom, right? It produces justice, it produces peace, it produces confidence. And Solomon's judgment becomes evident that God is actively ruling his people through the king he has appointed. He prayed for wisdom, he got wisdom, and he applied his wisdom. Brilliant. And that is what it is. True wisdom is going to reflect God's own character, because it combines both justice and mercy together in the one person. So, not by cleverness, but it's by asking for God's wisdom and enacting God's greater purposes. Alright, let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. So, Solomon became famous because God gave him extraordinary wisdom. Yet even Solomon's wisdom has limits, and we're going to see the sort of things he gets up to later in 1 Kings, 2 Kings, and beyond. But Jesus Christ is infinitely greater, because he doesn't simply possess wisdom, he is the very wisdom of God made flesh. Because Solomon, he can judge some difficult cases, but Jesus perfectly knows every single human heart. Solomon's wisdom amazes all of Israel, right? They stood in awe of the king. But Jesus perfectly knows everyone, and his wisdom offers life to the whole world. This is why we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 30 that, in contrast, God is why you are in Christ Jesus, who became for us wisdom from God, and righteousness, and sanctification, and redemption. So, the wisdom Solomon received was a gift, right? But this gift is perfectly embodied in Jesus Christ, who invites his people to follow him. Alright, so how can we apply this chapter in our everyday lives? We need to pray Solomon's prayer. Right? Before we make an important decision, we need to pause and we need to ask God specifically for an understanding heart before asking him to change our circumstances. And I think by doing this, we're able to ask something that God delights in. How can I have an understanding heart? How can I be more discerning? How can I, whatever we say. And the second thing is, Solomon's wisdom can be found in Proverbs, right? So we can read a chapter from Proverbs, a chapter of the Bible, and we can ask not just, what does this mean? But how does God want this to shape the way I live today? Alright, so we saw that wisdom begins with humility before God. God delights when his children seek his priorities first. And that true wisdom and discernment probes the heart and not just superficial appearances. That godly wisdom produces justice, peace, and faithful leadership, and that Solomon ultimately points forward to Jesus Christ, who is the wisdom of God incarnate in a person. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. Next time we're going to go through 1 Kings chapter 4, where Solomon's wisdom is going to be displayed throughout his kingdom as Israel experiences remarkable peace and prosperity, and we'll explore why wisdom blesses not only individuals but entire communities, and how this flourishing points us to the greater reign of King Jesus. Don't want to miss it. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.